Countdown to Election Day. As Kamala Harris and Donald Trump race against time to make their cases to American voters, we break down this week's newsmaking moments from the campaign trail.
November 5th, 2024 will be Liberation Day in America.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged.
And look at the candidates' stances on abortion, taxes, and climate change. Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm Lisa Desjardins. We are less than 3 weeks away until Election Day, and the candidates have been busy. Donald Trump began the week with an unusual pause at a town hall in Oaks, Pennsylvania.
All right, turn that music up. Turn it up.
He turned the event into a half-hour music session after 2 attendees fell ill and got medical attention. Later in the week at a Fox News town hall, the former president repeated his claim that some fellow Americans are the enemy and declared that he could use the military to quash dissent.
It is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick.
In front of the all-female audience, Trump said he is pro-IVF, even as Republican lawmakers recently blocked IVF legislation.
I'm the father of IVF.
His opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, called the comment quite bizarre.
What he should take responsibility for is that couples who are praying and hoping and working toward growing a family have been so disappointed and harmed by the fact that IVF treatments have now been put at risk.
For her part, Harris spent part of the week courting black voters amid concerns of their weakening support for her, which included doing a radio interview with Charlemagne the God, host of The Breakfast Club.
Ask Donald Trump what his plan is for Black America. Ask him. I'll tell you what it is. Look at Project 2025. Project 2025 tells you the plan includes making police departments have stop and frisk policies.
And in Georgia, a few pieces of news. The first day of early voting broke records, and 2 court rulings blocked efforts by Republican officials to change voting rules in the state. One ruling barred election officials from refusing to certify the results, and another said, no, election workers cannot be required to count the final ballots by hand. Veteran journalist Bob Woodward's new book, War, reveals some new reporting on both candidates. Our Nick Schifrin asked Woodward about Biden's relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and how it differs from Harris's. This, as polls show the administration's support for Israel, could be a weakness with some voters in swing state Michigan and elsewhere.
President Biden's policy when it comes to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is often referred to as the bear hug, as in the closer Biden holds Bibi, hopefully the more Bibi will be willing to moderate his behavior per U.S. interests. That's the idea. But in private, you quote Biden calling Netanyahu an SOB, one of the biggest effing a-holes in the world, a bad effing guy, and an effing liar. There comes an unprecedented moment in the Middle East. Biden is trying to get Israel to listen to him when it comes to responding to the October 7th attacks. Did the president feel like Netanyahu listened?
Well, there was listening, but Bibi's going to do what he wants, and he says so to Biden. Look, I'm going to have to do some of these things that maybe you're not going to like. But what's so interesting, there can be an alliance of policy. As somebody in the White House said, that Biden's policy is pro-Israel, but not necessarily pro-Netanyahu.
There was a similar gap between what the president said in public in terms of support for Netanyahu and how he described him in private that you described with Vice President Harris. You described this meeting that Vice President Harris had with Benjamin Netanyahu back in July. And after the meeting, you quote the Israeli ambassador here saying that the meeting was cordial. But after, Harris comes out and says, I will not stand silent as the people of Gaza suffer. And Netanyahu, you say, was furious. Why?
He was furious because at the meeting, which was a kind of, hey, Israel, United States, everything is fine. And then when she comes out and makes that declaration, which tells you something about her, she's separating herself from some of the Biden policy. And Netanyahu is just burning, furious. But this is just a couple of months ago, and she's liable to be the next United States president, as we know, as he knows. So there's a fury, but it seems to stay private.
Let's switch to former President Donald Trump. You report that as president in 2020, Trump sent a bunch of Abbott point-of-care COVID test machines for Putin's personal use, when, of course, those were in short supply at the time, and that since Trump has left office, he and Putin have spoken as many as 7 times. Do you believe it is still a mystery, as you quote former Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats saying, it's a mystery why Trump treats Putin this way?
Yeah, or is it blackmail, is what Coates asks the question about. But now we see today that Trump is out saying, not denying that he's talked to Putin, and say, well,
maybe it would be smart if I did.
Yeah, it would. And when Trump says something is smart, that means he's either done it or he's planning on doing it. So the relationship between Putin and Trump is central to understanding Trump, because what the characteristics of Trump are, he really has no plan. It's just what comes into his mind, and he has no team, and he operates alone. This is very different than the kind of relationship that others have had with Putin.
Bob Woodward, the book is War. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In a grilling at the Economic Press Club of Chicago Tuesday, Trump was evasive when asked directly about his phone calls with Russia's President Vladimir Putin.
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we.
2 years ago, the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade made abortion a top political issue across America. Amna Nawaz recently spoke with our Laura Barón Lopez about both candidates' positions on reproductive rights.
Start with the national landscape for us here. Where do the bans and restrictions currently stand nationwide?
Right now, across the country, 13 states total, Amna, have abortion bans with very few exceptions. Now, after that, there are 4 states that have bans at 6 weeks, and 3 other states ban abortions after 12 or 15 weeks. And the majority of those states are in the Deep South, including swing states like Georgia and North Carolina.
Okay, so that's where we are now. When it comes to the candidates, walk us through. Where does Vice President Harris stand on this issue?
Harris became the face of abortion rights for the Biden administration, and she was the first sitting vice president believed to have visited an abortion clinic during this administration. Now, when it comes to her positions on abortion, here's what she wants to do. She wants to restore the federal right to an abortion that was first established under Roe v. Wade. She wants to protect abortion access until fetal viability, which is generally considered to be around 23 to 24 weeks. And she supports ending the filibuster to pass federal protections for abortion. The reality, though, Amna, is that it's highly unlikely that Vice President Harris would have enough votes in the Senate to end the filibuster and to pass legislation like that. But Harris made her pitch to Latino voters on this issue in a town hall last night.
There are probably many people here and watching who rightly have made a decision that they do not believe in abortion. The point that I'm making is not about changing their mind about what's right for them or their family. It's simply saying the government shouldn't be making this decision.
Amna, Harris has made abortion rights one of the biggest issues in her campaign this year and is hoping that it helps her in a number of the swing states.
Okay, so that's where Vice President Harris stands. What about her opponent, former President Trump?
When running in 2016, Donald Trump said that you have to ban abortion. Now, let's dive into his record and current positions, Amna. In 2016, he also said there has to be some form of punishment for women who get abortions. And in 2016, he ran on appointing Supreme Court justices to overturn Roe. Now, since then, the former president has said that he would veto a 15-week national abortion ban, despite the fact that multiple Republicans and the anti-abortion movement support a national ban. And Donald Trump has said he would allow states to restrict abortion access. Now, Donald Trump, as he's been running, has also said that states with bans have a right to monitor pregnancies and prosecute violations. The former president is also open to restricting abortion pill access like mifepristone. And then finally, Project 2025 calls for a nationwide abortion ban. And we mentioned Project 2025, Amna, because so many of the people that wrote that and that are calling for that served in the first Trump administration and are likely to serve in a second Trump administration. Now, at a recent rally, Donald Trump also suggested that women are not going to need to worry anymore about abortions if he's elected again.
You will be protected, and I will be your protector. Women will be happy, healthy, confident, and free. You will no longer be thinking about abortion. It's all they talk about, abortion.
And we should also note the past comments made by Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. In 2022, when he was running for the Senate, Amna, he said that he would like abortion to be illegal nationally. And he also said that he was, quote, sympathetic to a national ban on interstate travel for women who are seeking to get the procedure.
So, Laura, as you well know, and you've covered IVF, in vitro fertilization has also been in the spotlight this cycle, especially after that Alabama Supreme Court decision that said frozen embryos should be considered children. Where do the candidates stand on IVF specifically?
Vice President Harris backs a Senate bill that establishes protections and rights for people to access treatment to in vitro fertilization nationwide. And her most prominent surrogate on this has been her running mate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, because he and his wife used fertility treatments when they were trying to have their first child. Now, as for Trump, that Alabama court decision put Republicans on the defense, Amna, and Trump has said he opposes efforts to limit IVF, that if elected, he'd provide full coverage of IVF protections and cover full services by requiring insurance companies to pay for it. But he hasn't provided details on how exactly he would pay for a lot of that. And Senate Republicans twice, Amna, have blocked that Senate bill that we talked about that would protect IVF nationwide.
So Vice President Harris is clearly running on this as a big issue. We know former President Trump has been asked about it a number of different ways. How important is this issue to voters this year?
To get a sense of that salience, Amna, in the last 2 years, 6 states considered abortion on the ballot, abortion rights on the ballot. And all 6 states, including red states like Kansas and Kentucky, decided to protect abortion rights. Now, this year, abortion referendums are on the ballot in 10 states this fall, including the battleground of Arizona and Nevada. And our most recent poll on abortion, Amna, it found that 45% of voters say that abortion is a deciding factor for them this election, versus 36% who say it's important but not necessarily a deciding factor. So overall, this is going to be one of the biggest issues this election cycle.
Great reporting, as always. Laura Barone-Lopez, thank you.
Thank you.
This campaign season, both candidates have proposed a series of tax breaks, but they have not always explained how to pay for them, including the concept of no longer taxing tips. Economics correspondent Paul Salmon looked at what's behind the proposal and some concerns around it.
Prince Chickasaw, bartender at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., 80 to 90% of his income from tips.
Suppose they were no longer taxed.
That would be great.
No taxes on tips. It was a proposal first floated by former President Trump in June.
When I get to office, we are going to not charge taxes on tips.
Vice President Harris adopted the idea in August.
When I am president, we will continue our fight for working families of America, including to raise the minimum wage and eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
On Capitol Hill, Don't Tax Tips bills were introduced this summer with bipartisan support.
What's the average tip you get?
Anywhere between 15 and 20.
For most Americans, a standard tip at a sit-down restaurant is 15% or less.
Who are the big tippers?
Families, parents who have kids, they tip really well.
Most people tip me 20%, which is awesome.
Server Jordan Colsani says tips account for about 80% or more of her income.
What would your reaction be if tips were no longer taxed?
I think every penny counts. So I think making more and, not being taxed and being able to keep all the money that you work really, really hard for is always a positive.
And what do the tippers themselves think?
Them being able to keep that amount and not having to, repay it later is something that I do stand with.
Will that change your behavior at all?
It won't. I'm happy to hear that they'll take more of it.
So, a policy with bipartisan support that benefits the low-wage worker. What's not to like?
Can I get a fruit cup, please?
As I discovered, plenty.
The issue is that there aren't a lot of tipped workers in America.
According to economist Ernie Tedeschi, tipped work accounts for just 2.5% of all employment.
Even among low-wage workers, it's only 5% of the lowest wage workers that are tipped workers.
And more than a third of the lowest wage workers don't have to pay any federal income tax, says policy analyst Erica York.
These are workers who already have a very low income tax burden if they owe taxes at all. They may not make enough to owe taxes. If they do, they face the lowest marginal tax rates. They qualify for tax credits that can offset some or all of that tax liability. So providing an exemption like this may not even be the best form of relief.
But whereas the very lowest wage workers wouldn't benefit much or at all, says Ernie Tedeschi, employers would.
It shifts the burden of compensation away from the wage side, which the employers have to pay, to the tip side, which the customer pays.
So if tips were tax-free,
there are going to be a lot more workers that want tipped jobs. And so that's going to give employers the comfort and the ability to pay those workers a little bit less in wages than they otherwise would.
As it is, post-pandemic, there's been a proliferation of electronic prompts for tips.
Every single coffee shop I go to, every single fast food place I go to asks for tips.
We're being asked now to tip for stuff that we never used to tip on before.
It's like a guilt factor where it's kind of like, it's you just go ahead and I might as well do it at this moment.
So you are susceptible to the guilt?
Yes, I definitely am. The guilt does get the best of me and just act on it, yeah.
You too?
Yeah, I'd say it's 100% guilt-driven.
Phil DeRuggiero, for one, may be among those developing tip fatigue.
A little bit tired of getting that at every point of sale.
And since the proposal incentivizes tipping,
I think that's going to become more pervasive if this becomes law.
Which could lead to unintended changes in consumer behavior.
I think that there is a default assumption that consumers are just going to pay tips at the same rate that they've always been paying. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I think at some point consumers might get exhausted. You're essentially asking customers to pay higher prices when they've already gone through a period of 4 years where they've rebelled against higher prices.
And how about this unintended consequence?
You could see a lot of income recharacterized to take advantage of the tax-free treatment. It's hard to predict how many industries, how many occupations could find a way to involve tipping in the transaction.
Let's say I'm a salesperson that gets a commission, or let's say that I'm somebody on Wall Street that gets a year-end bonus. So I reclassify my commission as a tip, or I reclassify my year-end bonus as a tip. The employer helps out because they'll get a benefit. And so everybody wins.
Except the taxpayer.
Right, exactly. Except for the taxpayer and the federal government. That's the sort of creative tax accounting that's on the line here if we don't have good guardrails. And, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. Now imagine what an actual smart accountant and an actual smart lawyer who's paid to do this 24/7 would come up with.
Now, the Harris campaign says she would push for an income limit and strict requirements to prevent such behavior. But here's yet another problem. Even when it comes to the low-income workers the plan is supposed to help,
there's not really an economic rationale to say a waitress who's making $30,000 a year deserves a tax cut, while a cashier at a convenience store who's also making $30,000 a year doesn't deserve a tax cut.
New York restaurateur Amanda Cohen eliminated tips 10 years ago. Instead, she charges a bit more so she can pay all her employees a higher wage. But Cohen may have to drop her no-tip policy if tips are going to be untaxed.
How do I look at my servers and say, you could make a lot more money working at a tipped restaurant because half of your wages won't be taxed anymore. I just don't think I could find anybody to work for me.
So with all these caveats, why has the proposal been so readily embraced?
No tax on tips. It sounds like a good way to provide a tax cut to workers who work hard, who earn income, who need a break. I think that's why it's catching on politically.
This proposal is extremely popular in Nevada, which is heavily dominated by the leisure and hospitality and gaming industry, as you might imagine, where tips are extremely important.
And Nevada is a swing state.
And Nevada is a swing state, exactly.
In other words, political business as usual.
People that get tips, you're going to be very happy.
In Soundbite America. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Saltman.
Hurricanes Helene and Milton have once again pushed climate change and its impacts into the political conversation. But the divide between Trump and Harris on it is as stark as on any other subject in this campaign season. William Brangham broke down the candidates' differences with Jeff Bennett.
So as vice president, Kamala Harris helped pass the largest government investment in clean energy and climate initiatives. On the trail, she often talks about climate change as a pocketbook issue, like the soaring insurance costs that many homeowners face due to extreme weather. Help us understand her approach.
I think on one level, she sees the polls that says the economy is the most important thing, hence that focus. Secondarily, I think on the issue of climate change and why she doesn't drill into it that much is that I think her campaign believes that if you're a climate change voter and that really matters to you, you're already in her camp because of the things you mentioned. Historic legislation, first of its kind in American history, and her opponent has said climate change is a hoax and we don't have to really deal with that. So as you mentioned, she does talk about it, but for instance, in her DNC speech, climate change was one clause in one sentence and that was it. She often talks about it, as you say, as an economic issue. She has said it's a crisis. She has said it is urgent that we deal with it. But let's take a listen to how she couches this issue.
We have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels.
So she's merging clean energy and fossil fuels there into one answer. You mentioned Donald Trump, who has famously said that climate change is a hoax. How is he approaching this on the campaign trail?
Trump talks about climate change almost always as a means to attack Democrats for the policies they've enacted to address it. And so he says those things drive up costs for consumers at the gas pump. He says they hurt the economy. He calls them lunacy. I mean, these are things like EV, electric vehicle mandates, or promotions of wind or solar or battery manufacturing. Here's how he often talks about the issue.
When people talk about global warming, I say the ocean is going to go down 1/100th of an inch within the next 400 years. That's not our problem. Our problem is nuclear warming.
Trump regularly dismisses the threat from sea level rise. I mean, he nonsensically says it will just create more oceanfront property. He says this is really a non-existent threat. So I just wanted to fact check this one issue. The latest U.S. National Climate Assessment on just the issue of sea level rise, I want to read you a little bit about what it says. It says, quote, sea level rise threatens permanent inundation of infrastructure, including roadways, railways, ports, tunnels, and bridges, water treatment facilities and power plants, and hospitals, schools, and military bases. That is trillions of dollars at risk from just one byproduct of a warming world. And as for this issue of nuclear winter, I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about. There is no such thing as nuclear warming. That does not happen. If he's talking about nuclear war, yes, that would have an enormous impact on the climate, but it would actually be likely a cooling effect because of the projected nuclear winter.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Exactly. So Trump does say climate change is an issue, but only because Democrats are obsessing over it.
So what would a potential Harris administration do as it relates to climate change?
Harris has not really laid out concrete policy. As you mentioned, she's coming off an administration that passed the most historic attempts to address climate change in American history, and she seems to imply there will be more of the same. But as you noted, Jeff, she keeps promoting all of the U.S. government's attempts to boost energy production, green energy, at the same time that she brags about America's oil and gas production. And there is an inherent tension there. The way we address climate change is to bring our emissions down, and the U.S. increasingly becoming the world's gas station is not the way to do that. And Harris, likely because she doesn't want to be seen as attacking domestic energy production, doesn't really reckon with this. She doesn't really reconcile how those two competing motives will be reconciled in her administration.
And what about Donald Trump? If he's saying climate change doesn't exist, it doesn't pose a threat, I mean, what is he proposing to do about it, if anything?
Trump says on energy policy that he's going to bring energy prices in half, cut them in half. It's very difficult to do that. Global energy prices are set on the global market. He has repeatedly said he is up for more and more oil and gas drilling, the famous drill, baby, drill. Although the U.S., as we mentioned, is already pumping out record amounts of oil and gas, Trump does not believe that addressing greenhouse gas emissions is an issue. He has said he will roll back environmental rules on the oil and gas industry. This is why he said to oil and gas executives, you ought to give me $1 billion for my campaign because I'm going to help you guys out. The Project 2025, the famous Heritage Foundation project, which Trump has said, I'm not a part of, that's not me, even though it was written largely by people from his administration. They have laid out a very detailed energy and climate plan, and it is basically to abolish all climate-related actions by the federal government. It will roll back the incentives within the Inflation Reduction Act. How much of that Trump could do if he was elected is unclear. He would need Congress and the Senate to do that. And interestingly, in the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of money has been seeded into Republican districts and to Republican states. And a lot of those local leaders love federal funding for a new battery manufacturing plant and all the jobs that comes. And they don't want to see those things go away. So it's unclear how far a Trump administration could really go. The promise he has made, though, is a whole-scale reversal of any action by the federal government to deal with the climate crisis.
William Brangham, thanks so much for walking us through this. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
That's it for this week's episode of PBS News Weekly. For all of us, thank you so much for watching.